Okay, I guess we'll get started and then everyone else can join as and when. So I'm Kiki. I work for Menter Môn, running the Smart Towns Wales project on behalf of the Welsh Government. So the project started out as a year-long pilot called the Year of Smart Towns. And that was mostly to do with raising awareness of the different types of smart towns technologies, of using data to make decisions to kind of regenerate the high street. So the project's closely linked with transforming towns. And as part of this pilot, we commissioned 10 placemaking plans from Owen Davies. So those plans are available on our website, and Owen and co are also offering further support to some of those towns now, and also working on a document to do with delivery. So that's exciting as well. In the meantime, I think the importance of placemaking plans has really grown. Transforming Towns now has it as a condition that any kind of intervention or project has to be part of a holistic placemaking plan. And also it's becoming more and more important that digital is part of those plans. So on that note, I will pass over to Owen and Adam for the presentation. So if you can all just make sure that your mics are off, and then we'll answer any questions at the end. And thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Kiki. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining myself and Adam. So I'm Owen Davies, and I'm a placemaker. I'm a consultant. I've been working in placemaking consultancy for nearly 30 years, and our company very much focused on helping places become more memorable, more livable, and more viable. So over the last year and a half, we've been working as part of the Welsh Government's Smart Towns programme, working with Menter Môn and with Kiki and her colleagues to pilot the approach for digital place planning across 10 towns, but we've also worked with 5 other towns within another local authority as well. So in total, we've kind of developed and tested and kind of still learning about digital placemaking through the experience across 15 towns. So we're going to kind of share with you our thoughts, our processes, the approach that we've adopted, and some of the key lessons. And Adam's going to give you some of his recent insights. So Adam's recently joined our business. Adam's background is, as in terms of digital and technology, was more recently with a local authority on the other side of the table, trying to understand the challenges of implementing a digital approach to our towns. So I'm just going to share screen, and hopefully this bit goes well, and then we'll make a start. Okay, Kiki, is that okay? Can you see the screen? Yeah, fab. Okay, so just to say, these are some of the towns that we worked across recently with Kiki and the team. And as you can see, they're fairly diverse here in Wales. They're large and small. In some cases, they're now cities like Wrexham. So we've been able to test this approach across a variety of urban, rural settings and towns of all different shapes, and also backgrounds in terms of their past as well. So I suppose the key question to start off with, for those of you that aren't familiar with the work of the Smart Towns, Year of Smart Towns, is what is digital placemaking? So we see digital placemaking as a new way of thinking about places in a data-driven world. It ensures that social, cultural, and economic and environmental goals of an area are thought of and designed very much with data and technology in mind. And particularly at a time when local authorities, developers, businesses and communities themselves are trying to be more creative and successful as livable, attractive destinations, digital really helps to provide access to high quality data that can drive some of your goals, whether they're economic growth, around driving down cost and efficiency, whether it's around environmental management, carbon reduction, or accessing new funds. So why is it important? So for us, digital is everywhere. So places of all sizes need to embrace it, and rather than hide from it. All aspects of local, regional, and national policy, almost all have a digital dimension in them, and it's deeply embedded within policy and strategy thinking. So if you want to stay aligned or try to influence these policies and strategies, of course, and access related funding, you need to embrace it. And digital placemaking is just as important for small places as it is for bigger ones. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea of smart cities. These have been around for a long time, but programs like the Year of Smart Towns have demonstrated that there's absolutely no reason why smaller places can't adopt the same approach. And places should really enjoy the same benefits. So in our view, no town in Wales, particularly with our programme, but across the UK, should be left behind. And it's important that we recognise that getting it right can result in some fairly big impacts. By using data, people can make better decisions about their town and their local area, with transparency on the actions and the activities and the trends that they want to seize upon, and they can take actions much faster. This means giving people the confidence to launch new businesses, to help existing businesses grow, and to track evidence of the success of their actions, whether that's new events and the like. So I thought we'd share with you some real-world examples that some of these may be familiar to you. But I think the first thing to do is to try and demystify, which we'll talk about in a second, actually, that when we're talking about digital and technology, we're talking about fairly hidden away small little plastic devices that can be perched on rooftops, on sides of buildings. And these are the kind of sensors that are driving a lot of the examples that we're going to share with you in a second. So digital and technology in placemaking sense is really important around managing traffic and parking. So this is a fairly dynamic drawing, but it's actually a sensor that's picking out at a key junction where they introduced a cycling lane here in our hometown of Abergavenny, the movement patterns of cars, pedestrians, cyclists, motorbikes and buses. And they were able to use this evidence to really understand the impact of a scheme, both in terms of its design stage and also in terms of its implementation and how to improve the scheme. But this is all driven by small sensors that have been placed within this local environment. And we're probably all fairly familiar with the idea that sensors can be used to manage parking spaces, particularly in areas of high demand, in terms of where there may be parking charging systems. And this is commonplace in large cities like Cardiff near to us, but can be applied equally in small towns as well, where parking might be a challenge or a key issue. And we know that sensors are really important about knowing your visitors, who it is that's using your towns, the footfall, the dwell time and the origin. It's fairly common practice to be collecting data on people moving through a town centre, but it's fairly binary in terms of counting numbers. But sensors can allow you to do fairly dynamic things. You can identify who it is that is in your town centre. A lot of data is anonymized, but you can use trends, you can use analytics to kind of identify where people are coming from. You may not necessarily know it's Sarah, who's 4500 Diga, but this illustration to give you a sense of the kind of dynamics of it all. And then looking at dashboards about how you present this information. So this is from Patrim, which is certainly a site that's worth looking at, where you can see lots of examples, particularly in North Wales, where you're able to present data around number of visitors, how long they stayed, and actually the duration across different days of the week. So we know this is really important stuff. Data and technology also allows you to have cleaner streets. You know, probably also familiar with the idea of having bins that tell you when they need to be emptying. And this is really a resourceful way of managing town environments. Having a dashboard that tells you and alerts you to issues around cleanliness. And whether you want to use technology around animating heritage or your visitor attractions as well. And sometimes it doesn't need to be high tech. It can be a really good website, but with some QR codes on your key buildings that kind of introduce people to a whole world of online information and routes to understand a little bit more about their built environment as well. And then more commonly, we're seeing examples of data and technology being used to manage the green infrastructure and the environment of our town centres, whether this is in terms of managing the quality of the soils or understanding the impact of any climate change, but also just understanding when your hanging baskets and your beds in the town centre need to be watered, which often can be a very resource intensive and costly exercise to undertake, particularly during the summer months. So why have a digital place plan? We've got some common challenges which Adam's going to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. So as Owen said in the introduction, my background before joining Owen Davies Consulting as a digital placemaking consultant was in a Welsh local authority that was a digital projects officer. And I don't know, obviously I don't know what everyone on this meeting, what their role is, where they come from, what organisation they come from, but I suspect we've got some local authority officers and then maybe some more sort of town focused officers and maybe just interested parties. But I think whenever you're looking to do this sort of introduce sort of smart technology or make a town more smart, you're going to run into certain barriers, whatever organisation you work for. And this is where having a digital place plan can help address those. We put a few on the slide, but I think for me, the key headings are about stakeholder engagement. We all know if you've done it, stakeholder engagement is really, really hard work and really, really difficult. You need to understand the dynamics of local decision making, how decisions are taken at a local level, who the key players are, but also who the people are that are often left behind and should be brought along on the journey. And then also when you're doing that engagement, realistically, there can have quite a lot of apathy. That's often connected to sort of people not understanding some key concepts. On the next slide, actually, I don't know if I can skip to it. We just sort of recognise that this area in particular is really prone to jargonisation, which is a horrible word for in itself. But you know, it's full of terms that can be quite baffling and also quite vague. So smart is very broad and can be many things. LoRaWAN is quite specific, but is a baffling acronym or abbreviation, whichever one it is. Internet of Things, again, is one of these terms that's banded around a huge amount, but I think a lot of people glaze over when they hear it. Cloud, for example, is probably a term that people are coming to get to know, but actually probably most people probably think of it in, actually don't know what it means to bandy it around. So demystifying these sort of terminology, I think, is a key role in your stakeholder engagement. And it's unless you do that, unless you have a strategy for doing that, it can be really, really hard to introduce these sort of smart technology projects and make your town more smart. Owen, if you could get back to the previous slide, please. So stakeholder engagement, I think, is one of the biggest challenges when you're trying to deliver this sort of stuff, and digital place planning can really help with that, as Owen will talk about in a minute. I think similarly, again, maybe from a local authority perspective, but I'm sure it happens at different levels as well, particularly when there is sort of public grant funding available that can be leveraged. There's definitely a temptation to try and do too much too soon or too quickly. There's a temptation to leverage as much capital grant as possible without thinking about the huge amount of work required to get that capital kit installed. And you know, getting the kit installed in theory is the easy bit, and actually it's the work around it that's far more onerous, needs to be resourced, but often there isn't funding there for that. So yeah, it's very easy to fall into, I think, to try and fight off doing too much too quickly. It's actually much better to start small, pilot it, move quickly, and then stop and reflect, and then try and scale up once you've learned some lessons. And similarly, again, this applies to many different projects, but particularly in the sort of digital area, I think smart towns projects, digital projects, and the sort of concepts really cut across so many different areas and directorates. As Owen was just going through those examples, if you think about the people involved in those areas, it's huge. And I think, especially within a local authority context, but also in an organisation, that means really working across different departments, directorates, whatever you want to call them. And that is really hard work. It means understanding people's priorities and the barriers and trying to find a way around that. And again, digital placemaking can really help with that, I think. So Owen, I think you can talk about the sort of our approach to digital placemaking now.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So, I mean, the opposite of a fairly complicated diagram, as you can see there on our slide, is something that we've approached with our digital placemaking, is something is much more simple. We talk about digital placemaking with the towns that we've worked with as a journey about in many cases, the towns are at a very early stage and even thinking about digital. They're very much at that foundational stage. And reality is that we just want them to get started. But there will be times where they've already started something and they've developed a bit of experience, and the importance then is to start using it and fully exploiting it before we start, having the whole kind of amazing specialization that is fully capable within the smart town world. So it's about simple steps. And we talk about steps. So our digital place plans go through a fairly detailed 5-step process. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide, and if you wish to come back to the presentation afterwards, you'll be able to pick up on that, or we'd be very happy to forward these slides to you. But there's the 5 key areas are really is understanding the strategic digital context. As we said before, policy and strategy is almost all certainly going to be talking about digital. And it's how does any smart town approach align with the frameworks that exist within your area, and whether it's in terms of potential technological support, whether it's in terms of officer time, or maybe even potential new funding. And then it's also really important around understanding place in terms of plans and partnerships. So it's not unusual to have towns that don't have a plan or a partnership in place, and we're going to give you an example of that in a minute. But it's really important that we take a place-based approach. So it's really understanding what is the vision and the priorities within a local town before really starting to talk about technology. Technology is not really the starting point here. It's actually, is it part of the solution? But in terms of understanding whether it is part of the solution or about creating the opportunity that you wish to drive forward in your place, it's really, you need to understand what digital infrastructure you already have within your town environment. And it's not unusual that there are legacy projects where technology has been implemented but maybe forgotten about or not fully exploited. So we look at the place on a number of levels in terms of the digital infrastructure that's in place. I think it's fair to say that we should be taking for granted more so now that we have good fibre broadband connection, and we also have 4 and 5G, but that's not always the case. But then we also need to understand what other infrastructures in place. So if you've got a shopping centre within your town, it's every likelihood that they've got a fairly sophisticated level of technology in place to monitor what's going on within their trading area. And is there an opportunity to apply some of that technology in the wider catchment of your town? Or is it a case that none of this infrastructure exists already and that you really are starting from scratch? So it's really important about having that digital assessment. And then business and stakeholder views. I think it's really important that we understand where people are on their journey in terms of their understanding of the capability and the possibilities around technology. But first and foremost, really understanding what the ambitions are for your town, for your place, and establish a direction in which technology could potentially play its part. And then lastly, it's about producing that action plan. And it's really important that we kind of take a fairly small but important steps. As Adam said, it's not taking on too much too soon. It's just really about getting started in many cases. And we talked about engagement. So here, just so you may find some of this interesting. Some of these videos are now being posted by Smart Towns Cymru, and they are available elsewhere, which we can send you the links. But as part of our work, we've actually found a number of those doers, those early adopters, those people that have already routinely using data and technology, probably not because they've thought about it a huge amount, but it's just become fairly routine within their daily running of their businesses. And it's really important as part of our work that we help to try and identify who those are, because they're very difficult to find often, and see the opportunity to use them as champions to kind of explain the full potential of using digital within a particular location. So we've got 2 contrasting stories which you can find online, but there's Carly from Closet of Style, who we would describe as clicks to bricks, who started a business from her kitchen table and has moved on to the high street, but has always been very much in the digital world in terms of developing her customer base and in the way that she markets her business. And then we've got Emma from Bookish. And Emma's journey was fairly different. She had to go from just being a standard independent bookshop on the high street, but COVID came along and she had to learn fairly quickly around the use and the full exploitation of data and technology to grow and to sustain her business. And in both cases, these businesses have got to the point that they now have a greater appetite to understand a lot more about what are the dynamics within their town centre in terms of who's visiting, when they come, what time of day is really important, and using that to influence the way that they staff their business, the way that they provide their services throughout the year. It can be shaped by the data that they gather from a smart town. We thought it might be worth just saying a few words about one of the towns that we worked in. It just so happens to be the town in which we're based, but we're using it because we think it's a fairly good example. Abergavenny in South Wales is a typical market town, seems fairly successful and thriving, but interestingly enough, didn't have a strategy or plan in place. There's no kind of coherent town centre partnership, but there were active, and there are active, organisations and individuals. What's interesting, there's some basic level of infrastructure in place, but it wasn't really understood. This kind of legacy project from a Wi-Fi initiative that really never took off. And when the officer left, the Wi-Fi got switched off and it's never really been fully exploited. But it's a town that's got fairly basic infrastructure in place. But it also had a fairly fragmented online presence, multiple layers of different organizations marketing and promoting the town, not necessarily always in a unified way. But at the same time, there was a plan to implement some digital in the town centre. There are some footfall counters, Meraki units, and then also a gateway system which would allow sensors to be connected to the cloud. Now, this is fairly technical stuff, and it was a really important level of baseline investment that could potentially make Abergavenny much more a smarter town. And what was really interesting and important here in terms of the journey is that the town council were curious, interested, and engaged in the conversation. And they felt that this was something that they wanted the town to look into and to develop. So we started working with the town around producing a digital place plan. Very much as the early stages, one of our earliest pilots, indeed, in fact. What's really significant from the work that we did is that we got a sense that there was a really strong and growing independent business sector that were fairly dynamic and actually willing to test new ideas. The importance of the visitor economy and attractions was fairly well known and established, but there was a feeling that it needed to be more dynamic and there needed to be a greater understanding about who was visiting the town. There are there's a number of large-scale events that are held in Abergavenny, food festivals, writing festivals, and the like. But there wasn't really a lot of data about what impact those events and festivals were having in the town, and particularly in terms of accessing new funding, whether there's a way of gathering more information about the impact of those events in terms of attracting more investment. A whole range of heritage attractions, importance around delivering of public services, and then also other areas around growing evening economy and working with a private shopping centre operator as well. So it's fairly typical in terms of its range of issues and ambitions. But what we found is that Abergavenny was very much at that early stage of the journey. You know, it really had only just got past its foundations by the fact that I suppose in many ways it had a little bit of infrastructure in place, but it wasn't really being utilised or exploited. So there's certainly some potential that we could build on. What's quite interesting is, as in terms of priorities, is that there's this sense that we needed to get the infrastructure installed first in order to start producing some evidence of the impact that technology would have. So we undertook a mapping exercise, identified what infrastructure was already in place, where some new sensors could be implemented, which would provide that baseline of building blocks of infrastructure that would allow you to start gathering information and data about the people who use the town, maybe in terms of how to manage parking and other activities within the town centre, and using that to support existing events to start gathering data, but also in terms of just a general day-to-day in terms of monitoring footfall and the use of the centre. And then also, more importantly, is using that data to inform a more effective way of marketing and promoting the town through the various online presence that existed. So the plan was fairly straightforward. It kind of identified some early wins and some easy steps that could be taken. And then the most important thing, and this is a piece of work that we're currently doing with Kiki and the team, is about turning a plan into delivery. So we started working with the town council because they had an appetite to kind of move this forward and a willingness to bring others to the table around ensuring that the installation of some sensors, which the local authority have planned, would be done in a coordinated way. but aligning that with maybe the design and the management of a new town app that could be driven by the data that's gathered from sensors that are being installed. Getting started so that we have some benchmark information so we can start managing the major events. And what's really interesting is that Abgyfenni is going to be hosting the Wales in Bloom competition this year in Wales, and that they can gather some data now that can be used to show the impact of that event, and maybe able to bring in some additional resource and funding for future years. But also the sensors will allow them to potentially reduce the costs of running that event, whether it's through the way that they manage parking and traffic movement, or whether it's around how often they have to manage and maintain the green infrastructure that's going to be across the town during the time of the event. And then they also want to use the same infrastructure, the same sensors to manage traffic monitoring and air quality. The town has a road that passes fairly close to the town centre. There's a growing sense around the quality of the town centre, that the impact of that traffic movement and is having on the town, on visitors, and also on the air quality. So the same infrastructure that could be installed to allow you to gather more data about who's using the town, about benchmarking major events, could also be used to ensure that the town is cleaner and greener as a consequence as well. And then finally, a lot of effort is currently being put in place to ensure that there is effective mechanisms to make sure that the data that's gathered around a town is shared in real time, fairly quickly, through dashboards that businesses, stakeholders can have access to immediately as the data is available. So what is the data says approach we think is fairly critical, particularly in terms of ensuring that businesses feel that there's some benefit from this immediately that they can fully understand and exploit. So just going to share with you to conclude some key things that we've learned as we've gone through the planning making process. I think it's fair to say as we continue to work with pilot towns that we're learning things all the time in terms of how data, how technology can be used in a placemaking sense. But I think the key findings that we've identified so far is about simplicity. It's really important that you focus on easily understood local issues rather than over-ambitious use of technology. And this is very much about place-led. Never start with technology and understanding what it can do for your town. Start off with understanding what your town needs, what the opportunities are, and does technology play its part? What we want to avoid is novel, glitzy ideas around technology that ultimately cost a lot and don't really have a long-lasting impact. Case studies. We shared a few with you today, and I think we found that actually relevant examples of real life experiences of places that have done this and have been successful are really important, and probably in our experience the most important tool for engaging people in a conversation around smart. And decision making. We don't believe that you need to have lots of people in a room, just need to have enough that have a delivery mindset that can get stuff done. As we said before, getting started is probably the most important thing that you can do in terms of smart towns. And then short term, as we've said, small incremental steps. Think about the next 12 to 24 months. Don't think much further than that, because you won't really know what to do beyond that time frame. You need to get some technology in place to address the issues that are really important to your town, and then build from there. And then in terms of building, the building blocks, we need to get the basics right first. We see that there's some fairly basic elements of a smart town. We believe that every town should have in place a LoRa gateway, which is a gateway that allows you to connect sensors in your town to the clouds to allow you to deliver a whole range of benefits that sensors can. And then the sensors themselves need to be installed. And if you haven't got your fibre broadband and you haven't got your 4 and 5G, you need to lobby the authorities and the providers to ensure that those basic building blocks are in place. You need to have a partnership that's going to be able to really gather this, to exploit and distribute the data. And you need to find the businesses and the stakeholders that are going to do this so that it can get the evidence to show that the impact that it's having. And then I think you've always got to be prepared to answer the question, why bother? Because there's so many barriers and challenges to taking a smart towns approach that we've identified. But we generally believe that actually having a plan that understands where you're starting, what the challenges are, and how you can potentially design, maybe fund projects as a way forward is really important. And as we've said several times already, we think it's really important just to make a start. There's a risk here, of course, that towns can get left behind, and we generally believe that that shouldn't be the case if you take a digital placemaking approach to your town. Thank you. Thank you, Kiki. I think that's everything we had to say. Happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Owen and Adam. That was really interesting. Does anyone have any questions or comments? If you just raise your hand or pop them in the chat.
Usual quietness. I can see a few friendly names there. I'm sure somebody would be kind enough to ask a question from without me.
Will I go first then if no one?
Yeah, please.
Oh, we've got Gary put his hand up.
Hiya. Question for me is, so obviously you've given us some examples there around like traffic movement, people movement. Do you, I suppose, you know, so I kind of understood Owen's recommendation, don't start with the tech, but do you think you are better off starting with a problem that you want to solve and then apply it? And obviously the kind of don't bite off more you can chew. So I'm just interested how you kind of think you should break into this.
Hi Gary, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're absolutely right. If we're taking a place-based approach, it's what is the problem, what's the challenge, what's the opportunity? There may actually be a fairly obvious technological solution. So I suppose our suggestion that is don't start with the tech is that we found that sometimes the barriers to entry in terms of conversation is by kind of saying, oh, we've got some technology, we think it would be beneficial to your town. Unless you're dealing with fairly mature and experienced partners and stakeholders who kind of understand it, have some experience, we've found that that's the bit that often is off-putting. It's really about how we can potentially solve a problem, and therefore this piece of technology, this data, this sensor will help you to tackle that, ideally in a more resourceful and long-term, more sustainable way. Okay, thank you. Gary's back.
Happy to go with another one. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Now I feel like I'm hogging it.
No, go for it.
So you showed a picture of the sensors on the side of buildings, and obviously, well, without giving it away, but working in England, the split in a two-tier between district council, which doesn't own too many buildings, and county council, which actually owns the highways infrastructure. So that would be the street lighting and all those kind of things. Did you kind of come across any barriers to mounting those sensors? And also, dare I say, those people who think you were starting to fry their brains, because we've got a few of those around here as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. Adam, your experience on that. I've got some thoughts, but do you have anything you want to say?
Again, from a Welsh local authority perspective, yeah, we had a few inquiries about it was more about 5G generally than sort of them sensors. I think again, it's one of those things you walk around any town centre now and look up at sort of first floor level, and there is all sorts of infrastructure in place, whether it's legacy infrastructure or just clutter, really. So a lot of this stuff is very subtle. I don't think sort of draws attention too much. And again, if you do that stakeholder engagement correctly, hopefully you address any concerns in advance. In terms of barriers, yeah, it can be really, really tricky finding getting permissions to mount equipment. Again, I think that's why the sort of place-based approach, and again that stakeholder engagement, finding the doers, finding the sort of champions is really important. Inevitably, you're going to have to compromise, I think, about where maybe in an ideal world you put your sensor or your bit of infrastructure and where you can put it. And I think that's where, again, it's very easy to fall into the trap of doing nothing because you can't do it perfectly. Whereas, you know, we'd very much encourage people to start small, get some things in place, even if they're not in the perfect location, start getting that data flowing. And then you can maybe reflect and look to move it if it's really not giving you the information you require. But better to start to get things in place than to not do things at all because you're hitting so many barriers about what can go where.
Adam, I just add, in the experience of Abergavenny, we've actually started to map buildings that are in public ownership as a kind of a starting point as part of our placemaking approach. But actually, the discussions we had with the local authority are very much that they want to go down the lighting column route, which you mentioned. And then what we started to understand a lot more is around the barriers to doing that, particularly because highways authorities are fairly sensitive about who opens up their columns, and they want their own kind of maintenance teams to do that and understanding different switches. So we're getting into the kind of the detail, but we're kind of fully kind of exposing all of these barriers and challenges, because what we really understand is that really good ideas are sometimes hard to implement, particularly when you're having to deal with different departments across local authorities. And we're just trying to navigate through some real life experiences where we kind of at the moment kind of designing projects and costing them. And we're putting together a manual to kind of explain actually what the typical hurdles and barriers are to getting going, making a start, as we've said, so that maybe we can kind of start local towns can start anticipating how challenging and about what the pathway might be, so they can do that more efficiently.
I think that's a really good point there, and I think kind of brings to light what Smart Towns is about, is sharing those barriers, sharing the the good practice and the case studies. David's put a great comment in the chat saying it's that it's all about the engagement, getting street lighting interested. So we're also working with Flintshire at the moment, who are sharing their experiences of installing on street lighting. So the more these towns share what they're going through, I think the more helpful it is for everybody involved.
We in one local authority area, we actually held a workshop across departments to just kind of almost go through a similar process we've gone through with yourself today, just to explain what it's all about, kind of identify that there are common challenges that sit across the local authority, and if we take a place-based approach in a particular town, what the benefits are from different departments working more closely together. And the idea that you can put a relatively inexpensive small piece of technology within a town, which different departments within local authority can all harness and utilize at a fairly low cost as well. We're talking hundreds of pounds rather than hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is often where people think we're starting, but actually this can be a fairly low cost way of moving forward in terms of introducing technology. Okay.
Thanks, Carrie. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Oh, so there's a question from Mereraid. So is this kind of smart town app aimed more at businesses and council departments looking after the town rather than visitors and general public?
When we talk about apps, it's very much geared towards visitors and those that are there to experience a town. I think a lot of conversations around smart towns often starts with the things that we probably ourselves through our phones more commonly understand. So like applications and kind of information that we can see and access on our phones. We think it's a really important gateway for people to understand that we're all part of this in terms of technology already. And it's a really important way to engage stakeholders because it's something that they understand. But in many ways, it is really not the most important thing here. Town app is probably kind of the cherry on the cake in many regards. But you're only really going to make a smart town app really sophisticated if you have really good quality data that allows you to understand when people are coming, where they've come from, how long they spent in the town. You can only really do that with those small little plastic sensors that you have around your town. And that's going to give you much more intelligent data that you can then apply to the way that you use town apps as well. So the two are fairly linked. But town apps are much more commonly understood, and people find it much more comfortable to engage with the whole conversation around that technology. I see David's mentioned the visitor app in Treorchy, which is a really good example that's been launched in Wales, which is around having a fairly sophisticated app. But we know Victoria and team there. I mean, they when they implemented that app, they were really keen to try and understand that they could also gather data around the impact that visitors on the town have on their parking, which is fairly limited and very difficult to find. So the app is really important for engaging a new audience in their town, but there are infrastructure issues and challenges that they really need to overcome within Torquay, and having all of the layers of information that a smart towns approach. So if you take a place-based approach, it's a really important part of having that app in place.
There's a question from Ellen. I was interested in your mention of animating heritage and visitor attractions. Do you have any examples where digital placemaking has been used by local authorities to animate high streets with the goal of supporting local businesses and the visitor economy?
Well, I think the whole idea of digital placemaking is in the context of town centres is really fundamentally about the town's high street, and there are many examples, and I think Cardigan is often quoted in Wales about the way that the data that they've used has allowed businesses to animate the high street in the way that they use their trading hours to particularly respond to the different audiences and the different customers that are in the town centre. So it's a really good example of a cafe that, through the data that they were being provided with, identified that I think it was on a Thursday evening that people spent more time in the town centre than usually within the centre, and they decided to adjust their trading hours to stay open a little bit longer on that Thursday to capture that opportunity. So the idea that they can start animating the high street by having an offer that's available from that sort of daytime into the evening economy only really came from them having the knowledge and the comfort of knowing that there was already a customer base there for them to target. So that's an example. But then also, you can use the same technology can be there to kind of tell the stories and expose the cultural significance of the assets and the heritage that you have within your town centre. Adam's aware of a heritage project. I think where they were applying 5G to introduce people to the history of a building through the fact that they could look at it through their phones, like an augmented reality. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, it was again, I think Scott's just posted a comment actually, which touches on AR, so augmented reality. I think that's one of the sort of more creative means that people are using. Digital placemaking, I suppose. Like you said, really highlight local assets. The example I've got is in left town centre focus, but I think that Sheffield one looks really interesting.
I think it's probably fair to say that there's probably a role for technology in helping to address most common challenges and opportunities that our town centres face. It's just taking a place-based approach so that you can understand what's really important, what the opportunities are, and how you prioritise them. If you look for technological solutions to something that's happening in your town or your place, you probably find something. And it's just in ensuring that if you went forward down a technological route, it's integrated within the full potential of what you're trying to support and create within your town centre.
Does anyone have any more questions? I think you've covered a lot there in quite a short amount of time. Everyone's probably processing. Yeah.
So we got some more, and Scott's posted an augmented reality in Sheffield, which there's really good examples of that. I think, Kiki, if people want to get in touch with us or through yourselves in terms of understanding a little bit more, or in terms of the presentation will be available so people can access that, then we're also very happy to answer any further questions further down the line.
Brilliant, thank you. And for those of you who don't know as well, Smart Towns Wales, this is, we offer that support in terms of any questions that you have about a certain technology. We've got loads of resources on our website and on our YouTube as well. So if anyone at any stage of the journey wants to have a chat, then please do get in touch. But like Owen said, this video will be on YouTube, hopefully by the end of the week. I'll send a copy out of the link and slides, if that's okay, Owen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. So if no one has any other questions, I guess we'll leave it there.
Okay, well, thank you for joining.
Thank you all so much.